you so much for joining us. My name is Justine Barda, and I'm the founder and CEO of Telescope Film, a website for international film and TV. We offer a database of over 500,000 international films and series with links to where to watch them in the US. We also have a dedicated page on the site for French film and TV with information about what's new, what's popular from France, as well as curated selections. We're delighted to be collaborating with AFUSA, the largest Alliance Française network in the world, helping 25,000 learners of French each year learn French, live French, and love French. You can find links to more information about both AFUSA and Telescope Film in the chat. The French Cinémathèque will take place the fourth Monday of every month. Next month, on March 25th, in recognition of both the Mois de la Francophonie and also International Women's Day on March 8th, we'll be talking about the film Saint-Omer, directed by Alice Diop, and France's submission to the 2023 Academy Awards. Before we get started, a couple of brief housekeeping notes. Please keep yourself muted when you're not speaking and stay on speaker view. You are muted now, I'll just point out, so when you want to ask a question, you'll have to unmute yourself. To ask a question, please raise your hand using the Zoom feature at the bottom of your screen in the reactions section, or put your question in the chat. If there are technical issues, you may want to leave the Zoom, then sign back in a couple minutes using the original Zoom link. This event is being recorded for our YouTube channels, and the total runtime is 1 hour. And with that, I'd like to introduce Renee Ketchum, coordinator of the One Film, One Federation program, and our facilitator, Aude Hesbert, director of the Villa Albertine in Los Angeles and French film industry veteran. Over to you, Aude.
Thank you very much, Justine, and very nice to have you back. I recognize a few faces from last month, so thank you very much for being faithful to our program. And I will start by introducing the movie before opening up to you. So The Night of the 12th. The Night of the 12th is a mystery thriller made by veteran director Dominique Moll in 2022 from a screenplay he co-wrote with his longtime scriptwriter partner Gilles Marchand. The movie is adapted from the work of Pauline Guénat, who spent a year following members of the Paris police and wrote a non-fiction book called 18.3, A Year at the PJ being the French police, in 2020, which was based on our own immersion experience in the police forces. This crime picture swept the César Awards, the French version of the Oscars. The film received 10 nominations, winning 6, including Best Film, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Director. And here is a little background information about the crew that I wanted to share with you before we can comment on the film. The filmmaker, Dominique Moll, was born in 1962 from a German father and a French mother. He worked as assistant editor and assistant director, among others, with Marcel Ophuls and Laurent Cantet. His first feature, Intimity, was released in 1994. In 2000, his second feature, some of you might have seen it. It was quite successful and was called With a Friend Like Harry, was shown in official competition in Cannes and won as well several César Awards. His third film, Lemming, opened the Cannes Film Festival in 2005. Now, the actors. The main actor, the main policeman in the film, Bastien Bouillon, has appeared in more than 30 films and television productions before this film since 2009, but only with La Nuit du 12, The Night of the 12th, allowed him to stand out and allowed him to win the category Best Promising Actor for the film. Bouli Lanners is a partner in the film. The depressed police officer is a Belgian actor. He's also an author and a film director. His film as a director called The Giants was nominated for 12 Magritte Awards, the Belgian version of the Oscars this time. He starred in more than 85 films and series and is quite a figure of a certain popular French cinema. You might have met his friendly John Doe figure in both comedies and social films from France and Belgium. And last but not least, Anouk Grimbert, the judge of the film, is a veteran actress of French cinema, famous in the 80s and 90s for her roles in Catherine Breillat, Olivier Assayas, Philippe Garrel, or even Bertrand Blier's films. In 1996, she won the Silver Bear for Best Actress at Berlin International Film Festival for her role in the film Mon Homme by Bertrand Blier. And she made a conspicuous comeback with Louis Garrel crime comedy last year called The Innocent, with Roche Dizem, for those who were with us last month, because he was also the actor of the film we saw. And it's very interesting because only recently, last October, Anouk Grimbert supported the actress who accused Gérard Depardieu of rape and testified against the actor for sexual humiliations toward actresses. And this was way after the film was released. So I guess we can make some connections to the theme of the film, but we'll talk about later. So then let's start to talk about the film. And I hope most of you have seen it and have it fresh in your minds. And I would like to ask a first question, because this film is quite unusual the way it starts. And as a spectator, we are told from the very beginning of the story that the crime of the film will remain unsolved. Dominique Moll, the director, tells us upfront that 20% of French homicides never get solved, and that this case we're going to be talked about in the film is one of them. So we know since the very beginning that we won't be able to know who killed the young woman. So I'd like to hear what you felt about the fact that he started the film that way, and if anyone could comment on that unusual way of starting a film. Take time to think about it, of course.
Can I comment?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, I was astonished at first because I thought, so what we will do for the next 2 hours?
Yeah.
And then in the middle of the movie, I realized why he chose to do that. I think he wanted to alert the viewer not to try to guess who is the killer or whatever, but to concentrate on something else. It was his message saying, hey guys, this is not a thriller or a police procedural or anything. This is something else. Try to find it.
And do you have an answer about what it is?
Yeah, I have an answer.
Go ahead.
Oh.
And I,
Yeah, of course.
I think it's more of the human side of the people working on the case, the story of how people are made differently, how some of them are totally indifferent, how others are extremely emotionally involved. So I'm interested in good literature, and I was watching it as if I was reading a novel. I usually go to these things to learn more about the cinema art, how films are made, of which I don't know much. But I forgot about all that, and I got involved in this emotional upheavals of the people dealing with that.
What is very surprising, it's as you said, it's not a whodunit, because we will never know who done it. But still, we're very caught up by the story, and there's a suspense hanging over the whole film. Could you feel it?
I think there is a sentence when the police inspector meets with the female judge.
Yeah.
For the first time, he said that something is amiss between men and women. And I think this is the theme of the movie, how this community of men in the police station are, and of course the other men in the movies, her boyfriends and so on, are reacting to the killing, and how the judge and the new police officer, the female police officer who joined, changed his ideas about how things are.
And that's a very interesting comment. And I myself think as well that the thing which is at stake is not the who killed the woman, but probably the sexual politics underlying the crime. It's like a study of characters that are unable to dive into this theme. And
I believe that happened. I believe that happened at the second meeting. The officer and the judge met for the second time, and that is when he made that thesis statement. Remember, he was in the first. He was so inward and isolated in some respects as a human being. His soul was so isolated. She commented on it. Oh, I hear you have this reputation as someone who doesn't talk a lot. And then contrast that with one of his last statements to her. Oh, I'm in love with you, because she was able to pull some strings.
yeah, that was with the judge.
So that was like his story arc. She fed heavily into his story arc.
Yeah. Megs, I think you have your hands up.
Thank you. Meg's from Detroit here. Thanks for hosting this. As a true crime junkie, I found myself really disappointed that it wasn't resolved. And I feel like that was like the metaphor of like the circular track and then him like getting things back on track. And then I feel like there was a lot of tension in all of the investigation revealing this woman's promiscuity, but then her friend really saying like, at the end of the day, like, she's my friend, and this is what you're construing about her has nothing to do with the fact that this happened. And so, yeah, I think that the film really left me with more questions than answers. And that was kind of a fun but disappointing ride in such an era of all of these neat and tidy docu-dramas and investigative reporting series where everything's kind of tied up in a bow at the end. So I'm happy that, this film sort of was provocative in a different way, even though I'm disappointed.
Yeah, it's good to hear too. Peter, I see you have your hands up too.
Yes. So what interested me, because I'm taking an Alliance Française class in literature, was this idea of the kind of intellectual and psychological life of some of the people on the police force. This was supposed to be like the elite, serious crime squad or something. And people selected, obviously, we're supposed to be, some of them anyway, we're supposed to be fairly intelligent. Like when Marceau starts quoting a poem by Paul Verlaine in the car, that's not something you usually see in a police story. And then especially when the women start to take command at the end of the film, the judge and the new recruit who replaces Marceau. And she has a lot to say about why she chose the job, because she thought she'd be working with really smart people, and she wanted the intellectual challenge of being on that. So I thought that was a lot of what the film was also about, besides the crimes against women. Obviously is a huge topic, but that was interesting to me.
You have a good point. There's flavor of documentary in this film, recording the everyday life of police forces in a small town in France. Anyone who wants to comment on that first scene? No, maybe I have a question for you. Could you think of other films that in that specific subgenre of unsolved thrillers that might be very different, whether it's in French cinema or American cinema or international cinema? Jay is wants to jump in.
Hi. Yeah, did you say different or similar?
They could be different, but I would say they belong to that specific subgenre of unsolved thrillers.
Oh, I was very much reminded of Memories of Murder.
Yeah, that's what I wanted you to think about.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I mean, it seemed kind of like almost like a French, it wasn't the same movie, but it was very, very close, I thought, but kind of, done in a French way and more of a feminist slant, I think, because it's a more modern film, probably.
Yeah, at least different thematic. And it made me think, I don't know if anyone has seen that documentary series on Netflix called Gregory. Everyone know? Because Grégory, Le Petit Grégory, is one of the most famous story in France of a little boy being killed in the mountain side in France, and it is an unsolved murder and of a kid. And Gilles Marchand, the co-writer of this film, has directed this series on Netflix, and I really advise you to watch it because it's also one of the most famous cold cases of French cinema, and the documentary series is really astounding. So I recommend you to watch it later. Hello, Aurelia. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you? To be honest, one of the films that stood to mind as far as being unresolved was Christopher Nolan's Inception. And it also reminded me how at the end of the day, I personally didn't care because I was so enthralled from the beginning to the end that it was like, okay, I'm disappointed it didn't get resolved. But as far as the adventure I just went on, it kind of makes up for that because I was glued to the TV I was trying to figure out who did it. I was like, maybe they didn't know, but maybe I will get the clue or I'll find some kind of detail, pretending to be an investigator. And I feel like it kept me entertained, not only through dialogue, but just how they decided to shoot certain scenes and what they decided to focus on, and just the I guess thrill of it all made up for the fact that it didn't get resolved. And I made that parallel with that film Inception by Christopher Nolan.
Yeah. And there's also Zodiac by David Fincher, or Twin Peaks, other famous unsolved cases. And what's interesting, you're right, Aurelia, is that we're in the same position of the investigators in the film. That's why probably the suspense is so tense and tough. And we're asking the same questions they do about where does this violence come from? And we discover the suspects, the gallery of suspects at the same time they do. So that's where probably the suspense comes from. There was an interesting comment, I think it was Peter, about the life of the police forces. This film starts as like a regular procedural film. You have all the codes of the genre, but it's very, very realistic. Can you comment on some very realistic scenes that you are reminded of from the film that are very, very kind of documenting the work of police forces? Think of the first scene, maybe, to start with. The retirement party. What does it say about the police forces in the first scene when they're joking, celebrating the departure of one of the oldest policemen?
I think it also it starts with it's very much a man's world.
Yeah.
Specifically, and it moves on from that scene. I couldn't find my raise your hand button, sorry. But it then it goes on to the comment that I think is very important in the film, where you learn that most crimes are committed by men and most policemen are men. So from the very beginning, you see where, I mean, you see it profoundly, but you know, I don't know what the word, you see a sketch of this male environment, but then you start to see how ineffective the police department is. All the details, from the Xerox machine to the reports to the tedious work to the underpayment to the rude jokes. No, but it's very much, I think, the focus on it being a men's world with a female crime, where the woman is guilty until proven innocent, being the verdict being determined by the men.
Yeah, it's a very good point, and I think it's really what the director wants to let us know with the very first scene of the film, with the humor, the jokes, the very hyper-masculine homicide environment, even though it's not that stereotyped, because there's some of them like are arguing, and but still, it's a man's world. Liliane wants to say something.
It's interesting when the woman was using the copy machine, she used it swimmingly with no problems whatsoever. And
You're right. And that's
and
definitely on purpose. She's the geek of the team.
obviously so intentional. And she makes the most magnificent break in the case. She was real gumshoes, as they say, making that break with that facial connection. It was very tenuous, and she you know, everybody had to give it to her. Nobody could hold back. That was the best.
Yeah. Aurelia?
Yes, to me, what stood out was, as far as everyday concern, was how much the budget took into place here, and how even in everyday corporate jobs, there's always talks of budget and what needs to be prioritized. And rarely did I hear throughout the film anyone say, you know, there's an innocent girl that died, we must solve this murder. It was always, this is happening, that's happening, that's happening. And even when Johan was having the conversation with the judge about, did you try this, did you try that? And he was like, there's no budget, there's no budget. And just, it made me think in a macro scale about murders that could maybe be solved and they didn't because of budget. And how do you decide where the budget goes, right?
Who
And
decides to put some budget to find who committed the crime? A woman, right?
right. So it was very eye-opening in that perspective when it came to budget.
Yeah, definitely. Brooke?
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks. Yeah, well, firstly, the movie was very interesting in playing with our expectations, and the fact that you brought up being a documentary, like, well, its whole arc and lack of resolution is like life. You know, sometimes things don't have a happy ending or have an ending. They're messy. Crimes don't get solved, you know, whether the person being murdered is a woman or a man. And the fact that it had become a cold case, and it was the director reviewing all these cases that when she took over, that reignited, saying, hey, I think we can revisit this, and I'm giving you the money, because the Johan, the detective, he had expressed, one, being overwhelmed, lack of leads, other cases coming in, obviously budget, budgets to continue on with cold cases. So that was really kind of explaining that's life. You know, things don't happen like it does on movies and TV. And I think maybe it was already addressed about him being the riding in the velodrome around and around, and then at the end of the movie, taking the other police, his former colleagues' advice to break out. So I took that as being very hopeful. The character was hopeful. Maybe that's going to give him a new view on the case. That was the one point of hope I had, is that he was changing his behavior, and perhaps he really would be able to have a fresh eye on it, along with his new colleague, this woman who was looking at things a different way. And I found it very good movie for all of the reasons above, and playing with the regular expectations. And then to address your question, what did it remind you of? I can't speak to a French movie, but I was thinking parallels to a really great TV show, Homicide, Life on the Street, if anyone's watched that from way back when.
Yeah.
And my favorite character was Andre Braugher. Rest in peace. He recently left us, I believe. And he was the person who was obsessed with the cold cases and solving the murders, particularly of the women and children and the innocent parties, not the drug dealers, but and there was one line that he said over and over again throughout the course of the series is, I speak for the dead. That drove his obsession. So I also saw that Johann could become that type of a character, but maybe his new take on life of getting out of the hamster wheel of going around and around in the velodrome was going to allow him to evolve in a different way. And one thing I didn't catch, and I would, if I rewatched it, I would look for this, perhaps someone notice this, when we jump ahead 3 years, does he ever mention the wife or the marriage? Did that just not happen or go away? Am I
You
getting?
mean of his friend? His
Yeah. Yeah, we didn't see that again, did we?
No, but he had to quit the police forces. There's an ellipse, and we understand that he had to quit the police forces because he burnt out and was too violent with the suspect. So he gave up being a policeman.
Okay. All right. Yeah, there were some things I think that I was missed because of the language, and sorry about that. Thanks for clarifying.
Thank you very much for your comments. It's very interesting. And Anthony has something to say. Hello, Anthony.
To continue a moment on the marriage issue, I think the movie cast a negative light on police officers getting married. The one officer was estranged from his partner. The other officer was getting married, and all of his friends were telling him no. I think that message is very strong.
Hope, because he decides to get married anyway. So it's giving us hope. I don't know.
I also wanted to say the suspects were all kind of creepy. So one of them or two of them were batterers. One of them was kind of living homelessly. None of them were particularly appealing, speaking as a father of a young daughter.
That's very interesting. Yeah, that's definitely a good point, and a point that deserves to be highlighted, because in this step-by-step, we every time we see a different suspect, it's like it symbolizes evil in all men, and they're not totally evil. Some, like their mothers, they can say very ugly, violent things, being very creepy, but also being loved by other people. So I think this portrays humanity in a very crude way, and it's certainly a way of portraying a certain tendency of masculinity in our society today. And I'd like to focus on the character of Johann, because it's a very interesting character. Of course, we already said it, he's a man, but he's also his character is very nuanced and very subtle. And there are two very important pivotal moments in the film where his character changes his mind on the case. I think Brooke told us a little bit about one moment, but I'd like you to identify those two moments and to comment on them. Well, I'll give you a clue. There are two moments when he meets the woman, and it's very late in the film, because if you notice the time, when the first main character, the judge, comes into the film, it's after 1 hour and 22 minutes, which is quite a lot. And the second character is, of course, the new police officer, who is a woman. But the first moment Johan changes his mind on the case is when he meets the girlfriend, the friend, and she's crying. Do anyone remember this scene?
Yes, that's the turning point, where she kind of clarifies, hey, yeah, she liked bad boys, and she was sleeping with all these guys on the down low, but she didn't deserve to die. And she kind of gave him a reality check. And I think the guy, the officer, was like, oh yeah. It just gave him pause and refocused him. Not that any of those police officers were saying we shouldn't solve the murder, but it was kind of an unspoken thing, like, well, she's kind of slutty. And but you can't, and the girl said the quiet part out loud, being a slut doesn't mean that you deserve to be murdered.
Exactly.
So that was a very key moment.
That's a key
And
moment.
I think about the characters, once again, this is the writer director playing with the expectations, is each suspect we were introduced to is progressively worse. I mean, so they're like, oh, everyone could have done it. Every suspect that we're introduced to could have done it. And then there's always a suspect that maybe we haven't been introduced to. That was another thing I was if I rewatched it, I would see if there was any type of breadcrumb, shall we say. Not that the director left one, but I can't say after seeing it once. But I was really intrigued with the image that the former colleague sent, that he printed out the flowers with the one blue flower. I was wondering if I've been thinking about that a lot, and what that means to the overall narrative, and if maybe that's a breadcrumb. I can't speak to it, but I've been thinking about it.
Okay, Paul is coming to the conversation. I'm happy to introduce you.
I think that was one of the breadcrumbs at the end, when his retired detective sent him a package of the portrait, and there was some kind of mark on it that he wasn't sure what that was about. And is that some kind of clue that he wanted him to realize that it was related to the case?
That's definitely how I took it and have been thinking about. Like,
Yeah.
Was that a photograph from the crime scene that he took on his phone, and it's gone unnoticed? I mean, obviously these are questions that the filmmakers want us to be asking.
Does it make him a suspect as well?
My take is it's also a sign of him escaping men's violence to nature, but that's my take only. Lilian? Oh, you need to unmute yourself. We can't hear you, Lilian. Lilian, you need to turn on your microphone. We can't hear you.
I know my computer's a little slow, sorry. So an Easter egg or breadcrumb, however you want to call it, I thought came much earlier in the film, when Johan was not amused at all by the other cops' reference about women. He made a slight against women like 2 or 3 times in the film, and the first time was fairly early, and he was much more forceful. He came into his being on the issue, but even at the time there was a tip off. He had the presence of mind to be open to what was coming later in the film, because he wasn't having this, mansplaining. Do you remember what he said? It was just something like, well, she's a slut. I don't know if it was a slut comment or somehow it was a blame the victim type statement.
Yeah, and he refuses his colleague to comment on that and judge the victim.
Yeah.
Speaking of Johan, how would you describe this policeman, his character? What are the little details that are giving us clue about who he is and his masculinity? Because I think it's very interesting in the way the directors are really slightly reversing the way we're perceiving the police force with this special character. Aurelia?
Yes. He comes across as lacking emotions. Like you never see him or too angry or too sad or crying. If anything, he seems kind of very monotone and robotic on his day-to-day. And another thing that I noticed, there was a scene where his fellow cop stays with him at his apartment, and he got up, I guess, to drink some water, and I forget if it was the time he was like, make sure you don't pee around the toilet or something like that.
Exactly.
And I noticed he was standing, because we got a full shot of him, and he's standing there in his boxers, and there's like no body movement except like he really like scratched like one of his forefinger. He was going like this. And I was like, oh, people who like can't express or have gone through some trauma tend to do that, I noticed. And I was like, he himself is very has gone through something very harsh in his life. And it just showed like the darkness. His apartment was very plain. There was no color. Like every room he's in is very dark. It's not until the very end where he finally has an epiphany and decides to ride outside, and the colors are bright and his hands are off the wheel. But very, very much, I feel like even in his eyes don't move much. And sometimes when he's been giving information, his eyes just stay all wide open, which kind of freaked me out in the beginning. And I was like, is he the killer? Because he kind of gave that psycho vibe a little bit in the beginning, and then he's very slowly, very, very slowly starts to, if you will, become a human, I've noticed. So it was
Very good description of his environment and his character, Aurelia.
Yes, it was very, for me, I couldn't miss it. I was like, this guy's very off. Something's wrong with
Very
him.
witty.
Right, which even made me suspect that maybe he was the killer. But then I just realized he was just a product of his environment and is actually trying to do the best he can and doesn't know how. He seems to be very stuck. And it's not until he just lets go of himself that he actually starts to bloom.
And see the light at the
Exactly.
end.
Yeah. Mhm.
Peter.
Yeah, so the film, we talked about how it has this kind of documentary approach, but then there's that scene where he can't sleep, and it's like a Bergman or, some kind of horror film where he imagines himself as each of the suspects, because he could be, like any man could have done this, and even himself, he's so restrained and so avoiding violence of any kind throughout the film. Won't stick to procedures. But then he realizes, he could have done this horrible crime. I have a question for you, Miss Aude Hesbert, about the fact that he had been transferred from Rouen. Is that, would that be something significant? Like people from there would be much more inhibited, let's say, than the guys in Grenoble?
I don't think so. I mean, seeing the first scene, I understand that he's a promising police officer, and then he replaces his old boss. So I don't think that it's a punishment or whatever.
Okay.
Just regular.
Yeah, but it's interesting that the people coming in like him and the woman recruit at the end, who obviously she was really smart and probably came in from another region also, to this little group
In
at the
town, yeah.
Hotel de Police in Grenoble.
I really like the way I really liked you brought up that image, that very surrealistic moment that breaks the rhythm, the realistic tone of the film. It's totally like a parenthesis in the film, and it's a beautiful, very beautiful moment in the film, where of course it's this super impression of images makes us think that we are all guilty of something. He is guilty, but we also might be guilty. Sheriff and
Yes,
Zainab?
I want to comment on the location of
Yeah.
the film because I think the book which the film is based on, it doesn't happen in Grenoble or in the Alps.
No, it
But-
was based in Paris.
Yes, so the director chose to change the location, and we see those beautiful, scenes of the Alps and the surrounding, and this a little bit, added something to the movie. If it happens in Paris, we saw hundreds of movies of crime in Paris, but not in this, beautiful environment.
Yeah, you're totally right. And the mountains probably add something very ambiguous. I would say it's both a jail with those heights and huge mountains, and also an exhilaration, an opening to the sky. So it really plays a very ambiguous part in the film, the scenery. I think it's very interesting, and it's quite unusual to see that kind of landscape in a police story. Liliane? Liliane, you need to unmute yourself.
I know. My computer lags. It lags a little bit. Thank you. Merci beaucoup. I thought when they alluded, when the rookie alluded to the fact she had an Arabic background as well, I thought the director was showing some intersectionality as well, and that was another positive in the movie.
Yeah, I like that this character is, as someone mentioned earlier, is a bit more what we called, she has the more conventional male code because she's greater with computers. She has a very great voice, and she's the man of the story in a way. And going back to Yuan's character, we've been discussing about the way he's so rigid, and he's like totally obsessed with the crime and circling one and one like a hamster. But we haven't talked much about the way he's a little more feminine than usual cops. Even his figure, he's like very thin, his voice is really low, and he's very open to discussion. And this brings me to the duo he's forming with the Marceau, which is quite interesting because usually in crime stories, I mean, the male relationships are quite like different than this one in the film. Brooke, would you like to say something?
Well, yes, I firstly, I wanted to speak to the interesting thought that you put out about the picture at the end of the movie was about him escaping civilization, and that maybe that brought hope. Oh gosh, everything's messed up. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I couldn't hear you guys. Crazy. And I think, and then to bring in, the thought that I had, and Sharif and Zainab outlined it, the fact that it takes place in the countryside in a beautiful setting, that we have this horrific crime that goes unsolved, and that the nature of it is just so horrific. So I don't know if I would say that escaping civilization is going to, that crime is going to be lessened, because he's already out in nature, in the countryside, in this smaller town at the edge of the Alps. But I think the hope towards Eden, archaic revival, these are all things that are within, the purview of man. It's up to man to have us collectively as a society to lessen the violence, to have a society that's safer and more just, et cetera. So I think obviously the director setting it in this beautiful location in the countryside, the exact place where you wouldn't expect this type of murder to occur, does. So that opens up your premise, opens up a really interesting avenue of discussion. So I just wanted to comment on.
Thank you, Brooke. Yeah.
To go back to your question about the duo, in some ways it seems, especially with Marceau's retirement at the end, that it's sort of like the passing of a torch, right? That maybe this is the evolution of the police force that we're witnessing, and Johan is sort of a new breed of officer.
Yeah, and I think this character is evolving a lot. That's in that way, the script is extremely well written, because and I think the allegory of him biking round and round during all the film, with all these sequences that are like punctuation in a sentence in the film. They're really punctuation, and we see that the film goes nowhere, that he can't find anything, and suddenly, after he met the judge, he finds hope, and he finally can hear the message his colleague was telling him, that he should escape his rigidity and go biking in nature and escape this circle he was trapped in. So there's a very interesting figure in the film of the circle and the way he escapes the circle. And it's very interesting, especially in the tradition of film noir, which is usually those very dark films that are doomed for a destiny that is dark and dark. And here we go toward lights with a very young character that is connecting, and that is a bridge between the world of men and women, trying to understand the women. And there's another thing I would like you to think about. It's that this film was written and directed by two male directors. And the film is focusing on a duo of male policemen. And I think it really echoes their discussions. Do anyone wants to comment on the duo theme in the film and the male duo and what it brings to the discussion? Tony wants to speak.
I'm sorry, I don't. Thank you.
No
Are you
worries.
speaking about the male duo or the film noir aspect?
The male duos to start with.
Well, I don't know enough French films to comment on a male duo in the context of French culture and French film. I mean, this is obviously something that's been played out ad nauseum in every possible combination in American film, and including, you get the female duo and the male-female duo, which this movie ends up having, but at the end. But I really don't know where to put it in the context.
What I find interesting is that the fact that the directors are men and they are questioning themselves, they keep questioning themselves of the way there's a misunderstanding between men and women is very interesting. And I think this film is really about introspection of men in their relationships to women. What do you think?
Well, I think that
I'm so sorry, Brooke, to interrupt, but I think that Tony did have something to say. I think we have two Tonys in the group.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Oh, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
Tony. Sorry.
Sorry, there's so many things happening. Yeah, this is my first, film. What I wanted to comment was, at first, I've watched a lot of films like this, and I've also watched a lot of Italian mystery films as well. And it's interesting. I expected to see this film in Paris, the murder mystery and whatnot. But I agree with everybody in terms of you're in beautiful Grenoble, in the mountains and whatnot, absence of people. And yes, crimes can be committed, right? But it's also interesting in a lot of in Italian whodunit, the giallis, they call them the gialli mysteries. The author also, there was the woman Penelope, who became a female person who tried to solve the crimes, but she took on the characteristics of the male, right? But she was still very, feminine in that way. But to survive, you had to have the character. You had to be that guy, to survive in criminology, if you will. So I saw that because it was a man's film in here. I mean, the French film really showed that a lot. That's what I saw a lot of it in this film, for example. I think other people have mentioned that.
Yes. Jay, would you like to add something?
Yeah, to respond to what you were saying about the introspection, male introspection in the film.
Yeah.
I thought that the main character, is kind of maybe a stand-in. I didn't think of him as a stand-in for the directors until you mentioned the directors. But I could see that he's kind of a stand-in for the directors and also for the audience, the male audience too, because, I start seeing myself, to what extent are all men, including myself, indicated in our society that creates violence against women, things like that. And I thought that, I didn't read the main character as creepy, really. I read him as sensitive and introspective too, mainly. And yeah, so I don't know. I think that was the most interesting part of the film for me was how it kind of indicts the main character, how the main character kind of indicts himself, even though, he's not doing any violence against women, just kind of he's part of that culture that gives rise to it. And it makes it implicates the audience too.
Yeah, and it's very interesting that his colleague, who was overwhelmed by his own violence and has to give up being in the police force because he couldn't stand the violence himself, he's that kind of character that accepts and confesses his weakness. He confesses that he's in love with a woman. He confesses that he hates. The fact that he's working in the police force makes him hate mankind more and more, and it's really quite unusual in a film to have such a confession from a man. So I think this duo is really interesting in the way it changes the representation of men in a film too. So we have time for one or two more questions. Liliane?
Okay, I think what was interesting is the director did a 180 and then did another 180. So it almost came full circle in that he's extracting this point we're hearing a lot about today, is that men are an important ally in women's rights. Women have been in this fight for hundreds of years, but he does this 180 and makes this film about the men. But the other flip again is, who are the two women who made the whole thing possible? The best friend, the woman recruit.
Yeah, exactly. You're totally right. Thank you for the comment. Anthony?
Hi, so I'm a little bit off the wall here, but I would love to know why French people love policiers. They love film, they love novels.
I
There's
think people
thousands.
all over the world loves mystery. And
Everybody loves it.
they're the most popular genre all over the world on platforms everywhere.
Hmm. I guess
I've been reading a lot of Maigret, the Maigret mystery novels. Oh, fantastic.
Tony, do you have anything else to add? No. Brooke, last question, last comment.
Yeah, so I wanted to comment on you bringing up film noir because and the evolution of the detective. Well, in film noir, the detective or the police officer, they do become cynical, and because of seeing the worst of the worst, and usually, the good guy doesn't win, or you don't get the justice.
Right.
So, and another trope of film noir is that also the detective doesn't see. They don't see the forest for the trees, and they're going through solving the case, making all of the making wrong decisions. Sometimes it leads to an unfortunate end or their demise. Chinatown being the best example. And then film noir characteristically is really points to Plato's cave, and that in this of seeing and not seeing and really having a fixed point of view that doesn't allow you to get out of this environment, hence going around and around on the velodrome.
Yeah.
So at the end, where he gets out of the velodrome, out into the world, once again, I took that as hope that perhaps he's going to see the case in a new light, along with his new partner, the woman, because having people, men, women, and people from different backgrounds as part of your team, having that diversity of thought and thinking will improve, and being able to solve a case. And obviously at the beginning, it was just like bro culture. And it kind of was a flag, hey, I don't think this case is going to get solved. These guys are just phoning it in.
Thank you so much, Brooke.
Thank you.
It is very interesting, but time is running, and all your comments are extremely interesting, and there would be a lot more to say on this film. We didn't have time to talk about the light, about the music, the sound of the film, which are incredible. But now time is over, and I need to hand it over to Justine to finalize this session. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thank you for choosing such a great movie.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Aude. Thank you, Renee. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today and for this fascinating conversation about this fascinating film. Let's see, as I mentioned, next month's French Cinémathèque will take place on March 25th, and the film will be Saint-Omer. You can find a link to that in the chat, and we'll be sending out more information about that shortly. We look forward to seeing you in March. Thank you so much.